I worked the night shift at the county transit garage, fueling and hosing down the buses after their final runs. Most nights it was just me, the echo of diesel engines cooling, and rain drumming on the corrugated roof like loose nails in a bucket. We kept the yard lit by 2 sodium lamps that turned everything the color of old blood. The last driver usually dropped the keys on my desk at 12:47 a.m. Always the same time, always the same tired nod, then disappeared into whatever normal people do when the world clocks out. One October night, the rain came sideways, freighted with the smell of wet corn and ozone. The driver, her name was Letty, handed me the fob for bus 413, the oldest in the fleet, the one with the cracked windshield and the heater that only worked when the brakes didn't. She said, "It's running weird. Smells like a barn fire inside." Then she looked past me toward the far fence and shivered. I asked what she saw. She said, "Just the scarecrow," and left before I could ask which scarecrow she meant. I walked the line of buses, tagging mileage, checking for graffiti. The lot is bordered on 3 sides by fields that haven't been planted in years. The 4th side is woods so thick even the moon gives up. When the wind hits those fields, the dead corn stalks rattle like bones. I'd gotten used to the sound, but tonight it was different, sharper, almost rhythmic, like something dragging itself through the rows. Bus 413 was parked at the far end, nose against the fence. The headlights were off, yet the high beams flickered once, twice, as if someone inside was flipping the switch. I told myself it was a short. I climbed the steps, the metal groaning under my boots, and the smell hit me, charred straw and damp earth, the inside of a barn right after lightning. The out was empty. The fare box was dark, but the driver's seat was still warm. I checked the log sheet. Letty had signed out at 12:47 like always. No second driver scheduled. No maintenance tag. The key was in my pocket. So who had turned the lights on? The rain intensified, a hard clatter on the roof. I was about to step off when the door hissed shut behind me. Not the slow hydraulic sigh it usually makes. This was abrupt, angry. The interior lights dimmed to a sick yellow. In the windshield reflection, I saw the seats behind me were no longer empty. Something sat in every other row, silhouettes tall and narrow, heads cocked at identical angles. I spun around, nothing but cracked vinyl and graffiti, but the reflection remained. I yanked the door lever. It didn't budge. The engine coughed to life without the key, diesel shuddering through the frame. The speedometer needle climbed to 30-40, though the bus was still parked. Outside, the sodium lamps flickered like strobes. Between pulses, the scarecrows were closer. They hadn't been there before. 3 of them, cruciform shapes lashed to cedar posts, burlap faces sagging under the weight of rainwater. Except now, their feet weren't staked in the field. They stood upright on the asphalt, posts dragging behind them like broken crutches. The nearest one lifted an arm, no, a sleeve, empty sleeve flapping, pointing at the bus. The windshield wipers started on their own, smearing water across glass already cracked in a perfect spider web. Through the smear, I saw the driver's seat beside me wasn't empty anymore. Letty sat there, but her uniform was scorched, skin blistered in the pattern of seatbelt straps. She turned her head too far, like an owl, and said in a voice full of wet straw, "Route never ends." I lunged for the emergency release, kicked the door with both boots. It swung open and I tumbled onto wet asphalt, palms skidding through grit and corn silk. Behind me, the bus rolled forward, no driver visible now, toward the main gate that was supposed to be locked. The gate stood wide, chain snapped clean, links scattered like cheap tinsel. I ran after it, yelling, but the diesel swallowed my voice. The bus picked up speed, taillights shrinking down the service road until they vanished into the corn. The engine noise lingered longer than it should have, echoing from inside the field itself. I called 911. 2 deputies arrived with flashlights and a thermos. They found the gate intact, chain padlocked, bus 413 parked exactly where Letty had left it. The hood was cold. No footprints but mine. They asked if I'd been drinking. I told them about the scarecrows. They shined their flashlights across the field. The stalks were empty, no posts, no burlap, only flattened paths spiraling outward from the fence like something had danced there in the dark. Letty's car was still in the lot. She never answered her phone. They found her 2 days later, seatbelt burned into her torso, body wedged beneath the rear axle of bus 413. Coroner said she died around 12:47 a.m., the exact moment she signed out on my sheet. The transit authority retired 413 after that. They towed it to the back row, covered it with a tarp that flapped like a loose sail every windy night. Sometimes, after midnight, the yard lights flicker and the tarp lifts just enough to reveal the windshield. Cracks have spread into a pattern that looks like 3 stick figures holding hands. The fuel gauge drops a few gallons by morning, though no one claims the keys. I quit the night shift. Took a job stocking shelves at the grocery, where the worst thing that happens is a freezer door left open. But even there, on rainy nights when the delivery trucks idle out back, I smell wet straw and scorched burlap. And sometimes, over the hum of fluorescent lights, I hear the faint diesel thrum of bus 413 pulling away from an empty lot, route never ending, always one seat left. Last week, I drove past the old yard. They've paved the cornfield, built a warehouse, but the 3-seater posts are still there, propped against the fence like forgotten tools, burlap sacks hanging in tatters. The middle one has a new addition, scrap of navy blue uniform, name tag still legible, let. The rest of the letters are burned away. I inherited the house from my aunt, 3 stories of Victorian gingerbread perched on a hill outside a town whose name everyone forgets. The will said simply, sell nothing, break nothing, cover nothing. The notary added, quietly, that Aunt Lilla had removed every mirror in the place the week before she died. I chalked it up to eccentricity and moved in on the first rainy night of November. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peace, silence. No echo in the halls, no clink of silverware, not even the tick of the grandfather clock that stood in the foyer. I found the clock wound tight, pendulum swinging, but it made no sound. When I stood in front of it, my own footsteps disappeared the moment I lifted my foot. It felt like walking inside a photograph. I unpacked in the guest bedroom on the 2nd floor. Aunt Lilla's furniture remained. Walnut dresser, brass bed, lace curtains stiff with age. Where a mirror should have been above the dresser, a rectangle of wallpaper looked freshly peeled. The wall behind it was painted matte black. I hung a small travel mirror I brought, just to shave. The glass reflected the room exactly, except the bed was unmade and a figure lay under the covers. I spun around. The bed was pristine. When I looked back, the mirror showed the figure now sitting upright, head tilted as if listening. I took the mirror down, stuffed it in a drawer. That night the rain became a roar. I woke at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of breathing, my own, but wrong, as if played backward. I sat up. The room was pitch black. The hallway night light I'd left on had burned out. Across the room, the black rectangle above the dresser seemed darker than the darkness. I reached for my phone flashlight. The beam hit the wall and vanished, swallowed by the paint. I stepped closer. The rectangle was no longer flat. It had depth, a thin void the size of a door. From inside came a whisper, my aunt's voice. You can't cover what needs to be seen. I retreated downstairs. The grandfather clock now ticked, but the sound came from above me, slow and deliberate. I followed it to the 3rd floor, a single attic room Aunt Lilla had used as a studio. The door creaked open on a space lit by moonlight through a round window. Easels stood in a circle, each draped in white sheets. I lifted the nearest sheet. Beneath it was not a canvas, but a mirror, oval, antique, frame carved with lilies and thorns. The glass was black, reflecting nothing. The ticking stopped. I should have left the sheet alone. Instead, I peeled the rest. Every easel held another mirror, all black, all angled toward the center of the room. In the middle sat a wooden chair, and on it a hand mirror face down. When I flipped it over, the glass showed the attic, but reversed. In the reflection, the sheets were still on the mirrors, and someone sat in the chair. I looked up. The chair was empty. I looked back. The reflection now showed me standing beside the chair, but my face was wrong, features smeared, eyes hollow, mouth open too wide. The reflection lifted its hand. I did not. The attic door slammed. The round window darkened as something moved across the moon. The black mirrors began to brighten, each revealing a different room in the house: kitchen, parlor, my bedroom, each with me inside, each slightly off. In one I crawled on the ceiling. In another my mouth leaked black paint. In the third I was old, throat cut, blood-soaking lace curtains. The hand mirror showed the attic again, but the circle of reflections now included a figure standing behind me. I turned. Nothing. In the mirror, the figure placed a hand on my shoulder. I felt the pressure, cold, solid, familiar. Aunt Lila's voice again, everywhere at once. The house keeps what it sees. Mirrors give it back. The floorboards groaned, not under my weight, but under the weight of the reflections. Cracks appeared in the black glass, each fracture leaking a thin line of liquid night that pooled around my shoes. I ran. The attic door refused the knob. It turned endlessly. Behind me the mirrors shattered in sequence, shards hanging in the air like suspended rain. The pieces rearranged themselves into a corridor of jagged reflections. At the far end stood Aunt Lila, ageless, holding the hand mirror. She beckoned. I closed my eyes and rammed the door. It gave. I tumbled onto the second floor landing. The attic door sealed behind me, wood swelling until the frame cracked. Downstairs, the grandfather clock ticked frantically, hands spinning backward. I fled the house, barefoot, coat flapping, rain needling my skin. Behind me, every window lit up at once, each pane showing a different reflection of me, screaming, crawling, bleeding, aging, vanishing. I didn't stop until the gravel road met asphalt. When I looked back, the house was dark, windows empty. I never returned. I signed the deed over to the Town Historical Society and moved 3 states away. Last month I received a package. The hand mirror, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, dated the day Aunt Lila died. No return address. The glass is clear now. It reflects only me, exactly me, except when I blink. In the fraction of a second my eyes are closed, the reflection keeps staring. I'd been driving since dusk. Not a road trip, not really, just running. My shift at the warehouse ended at 11, and instead of going home, I kept the headlights pointed west, the windshield wipers keeping time like a metronome. By 1:47 a.m., the rain was coming down in sheets heavy enough to drown the radio. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and the neon coffee cup sign flickering at the edge of the off-ramp looked like salvation. The parking lot was empty except for one mud-slick pickup and a single Crown Vic that looked retired from police duty. Inside, the diner was all formica and fluorescence, exactly the kind of place that exists only between midnight and dawn. A bell above the door gave a half-hearted ding when I stepped through. No one looked up. There were 6 booths, but only the last one on the left was lit, overhead bulb humming like it was trying to confess something. A waitress, maybe 40, dark roots, name tag reading Debbie in cracked plastic, nodded toward it without a word. I slid onto the squeaky vinyl seat, facing the long window streaked with rain. She poured coffee that tasted like it had been waiting since the Nixon administration, then disappeared through swinging doors into the kitchen. I didn't see her again. 10 minutes passed. 20. Outside, the pickup reversed slowly, no lights, then rolled forward and stopped, headlights pointed straight at the glass. The driver never got out. I checked my phone. No service. When I looked up, The pickup was gone, but the space it had occupied was still wet, engine heat rising in ghostly curls. The bell above the door never rang, yet I felt the pressure change that meant someone had entered. I glanced toward the front. No one. But in the reflection on the napkin dispenser, I saw a tall shape standing behind me, just outside the cone of light. The image was there only a second, gone before I could turn. My heart started doing that thing where it forgets the next beat. I told myself it was fatigue, the long shift, the rain. I stirred sugar into the coffee and watched the granules swirl like silt in a river. When I raised the cup again, the liquid inside was darker, thick, almost oily. I set it down, untouched. From the kitchen came the slow scrape of metal on tile, like someone dragging a cleaver. No voices, no clatter of pans, just that single, deliberate sound moving closer to the double doors. I thought about calling out, but the word Debbie dried up in my throat. Instead, I reached for the laminated menu wedged behind the napkin holder. It was dated October 1987. At the bottom, scrawled in red ballpoint, "Order what you want, pay with what you can't replace." I pushed the menu away. The overhead bulb dimmed, flared, then steadied. In the window's reflection, I noticed the booth across from me now had an occupant, a man in a hooded raincoat, face hidden. His hands were flat on the table, palms up, as if waiting for communion. I blinked. The seat was empty again, but 2 wet handprints remained on the formica, steaming. A radio behind the counter crackled to life, one of those old transistor jobs that only catches half a signal. A weather report, maybe, or a hymn. The words were lost beneath static that sounded too much like whispering. I caught fragments. Bridge washed out. And driver never found. The static swelled, then cut to dead air. I decided to leave. I stood, dropped a 5 on the table, and started for the door. The bell above it refused to ding. I pushed. The glass was cold, colder than the night outside, and it flexed like thin ice. Beyond it, the parking lot was gone. Instead, there was only the highway, slick and black, stretching into a darkness that swallowed my headlights entirely. The diner itself seemed to hover over nothing, suspended in the rain. I stepped back. Behind me, the kitchen doors swung open. Debbie walked out, but not the Debbie who had poured coffee. This one was younger, hairpinned 1950s style, uniform crisp and white except for the dark bib of blood blooming from her collar. She carried a plate covered by a silver dome. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown, mouth working silently like a fish pulled from water. She set the plate in front of the last booth, my booth, and lifted the dome. Steam rose, carrying a coppery smell I didn't want to name. She turned to me, smiled with too many teeth, and pointed to the seat. I shook my head. The smile vanished. Her face collapsed into something old, disappointed. She took a step toward me. The overhead bulb popped, showering sparks. Darkness. For a moment, the only light came from the neon sign outside, strobing red through the rain. In that pulsing glow, I saw every booth now had an occupant, shadow figures with hollow eyes, all turned in my direction. The bell above the door rang once, though the door never moved. A sound like breath on the back of my neck. I ran. Down the aisle, past the counter, past the radio now bleeding a child's voice reciting numbers. Behind me, the scrape of metal on tile began again, faster, keeping pace. I shoved through the kitchen doors, expecting stainless steel and fluorescent glare, and found instead a narrow hallway lit by a single hanging bulb. The walls were lined with framed photographs. The diner in every decade, always the same 6 booths, always the same last one lit. In every picture, a figure sat alone, face blurred by motion or decay. I recognized my jacket in the most recent frame. At the end of the hall was an exit. I slammed into the push bar, nothing. The door was painted on the wall. Behind me, the hallway stretched longer than the building should allow, the bulb growing smaller, dimmer. From the darkness beyond it came wet footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. I clawed at the painted door until my nails split. A hand fell on my shoulder, Debbie's, cold and soft as dough. She leaned close, breath smelling of copper pennies, and whispered, "Order what you want, pay with what you can't replace." I woke to the sound of my own scream and the hiss of windshield wipers. I was in my car, parked under the neon coffee cup sign, engine off, windows fogged. The diner was dark, windows boarded, a faded closed since 1987 stencil on the door. No pickup, no Crown Vic. Only my tire tracks in the mud, and on the passenger seat, a white ceramic coffee cup, lipstick smudge on the rim, coffee inside still steaming. I threw the cup out the window and drove. The rain never let up. Somewhere past the county line, I glanced in the rear view and saw the cup sitting upright in the back seat, lipstick now spelling a single word across the inside of the windshield. Next, I haven't stopped driving since. Every mile, every off-ramp, I scan for neon. Because I know sooner or later the sign will flicker again, and the bell will ding, and Debbie will be waiting with the silver dome. And next time, I won't have the strength to refuse the seat. I restore reel-to-reel tapes for a living, old sermons, forgotten jazz sessions, police evidence, whatever walks in the door. My lab is a converted garage behind my house, walls lined with demagnetizers, vinegar sweet with the smell of aging acetate. Last winter, a manila envelope arrived with no return address, postmarked midnight, KS. Inside was a 7-inch reel, white box, handwritten label. Do not play after 11 p.m. A second line, smaller. Side B records the listener. The client, whoever they were, had wired cash and a note that read, "Preserve whatever's left." I threaded the tape onto my Revox anyway. The first side was 43 minutes of silence, not his, pure, black silence with occasional heartbeat thumps that made the VU needles jump. Halfway through, faint breathing began, close-micked, irregular. No words, just breathing that quickened when I leaned closer, as if it knew I was listening. At 10:58 p.m., the reel ended. I flipped it, professional habit, before remembering the warning. Side B began with a click, then my own voice saying, "Testing, 1, 2, the words I'd spoken aloud while setting levels. But I hadn't recorded anything yet. I rewound to confirm. There it was again, my voice, clear as day, followed by a pause, then a child whispering, "He hears us." I killed the power. The tape kept moving. The reels spun by themselves, tape spooling through the heads, drawing blood-thin red lines on the counter. I yanked the plug from the wall. The motor slowed, stopped, but the tape continued to feed, unrolling onto the floor like intestines. The child's voice rose. "Don't stop. We need the room." I cut the tape with scissors. The severed ends fused back together before they hit the table, edges knitting in a blur of magnetic oxide. I grabbed the reel, intending to smash it, but the plastic was warm, pulsing like skin. Across the label, new words bled through the paper in my own handwriting. "You already did." The garage lights dimmed. My computer monitor flickered, although it had no power, screen showing grainy black and white footage of my lab, shot from the corner near the ceiling. In the video, I sat at the bench, threading the tape, but another version of me stood behind my chair, head tilted, eyes black holes. As I watched, the on-screen me lifted a razor blade and began slicing the tape into thin strips that curled like ribbon. The real tape in my hand bled the same strips, falling to the floor and writhing toward the vents. I bolted for the door. It wouldn't open. The knob rotated uselessly, metal soft as clay. The walls bulged inward, acoustic foam rippling like water. The child's voice came from every speaker, every coil. Side B needs space. I felt a tug at my sleeve, looked down to see a strip of magnetic tape winding around my wrist, tight as wire. Another loop snared my ankle. They pulled me backward toward the reel, which had grown larger, platter wide, black oxide glistening like oil. The tape looped around my neck. I smelled vinegar, felt the sticky pull against skin. The monitor showed the on-screen me now, wrapping the tape around my own throat, smiling with too many teeth. The real tape tightened. My vision tunneled. Somewhere in the hiss, I heard my mother's voice, reading me bedtime stories I'd forgotten, then my first girlfriend whispering breakup words, then the judge at my custody hearing, all layered over each other until they became the same voice. Final click. The tape snapped. I fell to my knees, gasping. Lights came back. The reel sat innocently on the spindle, label unchanged. The severed tape lay in neat, coiled piles, no longer moving. My throat was unmarked, but the envelope was gone. In its place on the workbench sat a fresh reel, white box, new label, side C, listener's response. The counter read 0 o'clock. I hadn't pressed record, yet the red rec light glowed steady. I left the garage, locked the door, drove to an all-night diner and drank coffee until sunrise. When I returned, the garage door stood open. Inside, the reel was full, tape spooled neatly. I didn't play it. Instead, I sealed it in a lead-lined film can, drove to the quarry, and dropped it in. The splash echoed back as a whisper. Not deep enough. That night, the envelope reappeared on my doorstep, damp and smelling of quarry water, label now reading, Side D Final Mix. This time the warning was crossed out in red. Play whenever you like. We're already in the room. I never opened it. I keep it in the freezer, duct taped inside a block of ice. Sometimes, when the compressor cycles off, I hear faint voices arguing over levels, my own voice among them, until the ice cracks along a perfect tape width line. The counter on the frozen reel now reads 43, 17 and climbing. When it reaches 45, I'll run out of freezer. I used to make the same drive every month, 3 hours north to check on my grandmother's cabin, restock the pantry, and make sure the pipes hadn't given up on winter. The last stretch was always the same. Turn off the state highway at mile marker 187, follow the service road for 11 miles of pine and gravel, then cut down the unmarked dirt spur that ends at the lake. Cell service dies at mile marker 185, so you're on your own after that. I'd gotten used to the silence, even liked it, until the night the phone booth appeared. It showed up sometime between October and November. I know because I drove the route twice that month. Once to winterize the cabin, once to haul out a busted water heater. First trip, the turnout was empty, just gravel and a single reflector post snapped off at the base. Second trip, the booth was there. Not a modern kiosk. An honest-to-God 1980s aluminum and glass coffin. Bell System logo faded but intact, sitting under the only sodium lamp for miles. Its bulb buzzed like hornets and cast everything the color of dried blood. I slowed but didn't stop. Phone booths don't just materialize in National Forest land. I told myself it was some art installation, some TikTok prank. In the rear view it shrank to a matchbox, then vanished behind the trees. But I kept checking the mirror, irrationally certain it would be closer every time I looked. Grandma's cabin was buttoned up, windows fogged with cold. I did what I came for, antifreeze, mothballs, a note on the counter about the new stove, then locked up and started back. The storm that had been threatening all day finally arrived, rain slashing sideways, gravel turning to oatmeal under the tires. I was concentrating so hard on staying on the road that I almost missed it. The booth was closer to the dirt spur now, maybe a quarter mile up from where it had been before. I could see the receiver dangling like a hanged man. I stopped. Engine idling, wipers smearing water into streaks, I stared. The booth door hung open, glass panel cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Inside, the phone itself looked ancient, rotary dial, coiled cord thick as a garden hose. No coin slot, no card reader. Just a single brass button where the coin slot should have been, engraved with the word home. I left the headlights on high beam and stepped out. Rain needled my scalp, ran down the collar of my coat. The booth's interior light flickered once, twice, then steadied. I told myself I was only curious, that I'd just look, maybe snap a picture and drive away. But the moment my boot hit the metal threshold, the door swung shut behind me with a pneumatic sigh I felt in my teeth. Silence! No rain, no wind, just the soft hum of the bulb and the smell of wet pennies. The receiver was ice cold. I lifted it to my ear. No dial tone. Instead, a child's voice, genderless, distant, like it was speaking through a tin can buried in snow, said my full name. Then, "You're late." I slammed the receiver down. The brass button began to glow dull orange. I shoved the door. It didn't budge. The walls were suddenly too close, glass sweating. My reflection multiplied into a dozen panicked faces. I punched the glass. It flexed like rubber. The button pulsed faster. I pressed it. The world outside the booth vanished. No forest, no road, just black water up to the bottom of the glass, lit from beneath by a sickly green glow. Shapes moved in the water. Pale arms, strands of hair, mouths opening and closing like landed fish. The receiver lifted on its own, cord snaking across the floor like a live thing. From the earpiece came the sound of a dial tone, then 7 numbers punched in slow succession. My childhood home phone, disconnected years ago after my mother died. I picked up. A woman answered on the first ring. My mother's voice, exactly as I remembered it, said, "You're almost here, sweetheart. Just 1 more mile." Then she started humming the lullaby she used to sing when the power went out. Behind her, I could hear wind chimes made of teeth. The booth lurched, a sensation like an elevator dropping a single floor. Outside, the water receded, revealing the service road again, only it wasn't night anymore. Late afternoon sun slanted through pines, road dry, gravel white as bone. The booth door clicked open. I stumbled out, expecting my car, but the turnout was empty except for tire tracks that ended abruptly, as if the vehicle had been plucked straight up. I started walking. The mile marker appeared sooner than it should have, 187, but the numbers were reversed. The service road narrowed, trees leaning in until branches scraped the roof of an invisible car. At the 11-mile mark, the dirt spur was gone, replaced by a paved driveway I'd never seen. At the end stood my grandmother's cabin, but it wasn't winterized and shuttered. Smoke curled from the chimney. The porch swing moved gently, though no wind stirred the trees. I climbed the steps. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of cornbread and wood smoke. My mother stood at the stove, back to me, hair pinned up the way she wore it before chemo took it. She didn't turn around. On the table sat the rotary phone from the booth, coiled cord snaking into the wall that had never had a jack. The receiver lay off the cradle. From it came the sound of rain on metal, distant thunder, and engine idling. I asked what this place was. My mother said, "The line only goes one direction, honey." You answered. She pointed to the window. Outside, the phone booth now stood in the front yard, door open, light off. Inside it, I could see myself, wet coat, terrified eyes still pounding on the glass. I ran. The porch steps dissolved into gravel, then asphalt. The cabin receded, shrinking until it was just a smear of color between the pines. I sprinted the 11 miles back to the highway, lungs burning, but the mile markers passed in reverse order. 187, 186, 185. At 184, I hit the booth again, standing exactly where it had first appeared. The door was closed. My car sat beside it, engine cold, driver's seat soaked. On the windshield, traced in the condensation, were 7 numbers. My childhood home phone. I drove. Didn't stop until the city lights reappeared on the horizon. When I got home, my answering machine blinked once. I pressed play. It was the child's voice again. "You forgot to pay." Then, the dial tone. I unplugged the machine, but the tone kept going, softer now, coming from somewhere inside the walls. Tonight, the forecast calls for rain. I've locked every door, pulled every shade. But at 11:47 p.m., the exact time my mother used to call to say goodnight, the rotary phone from the booth rings from the kitchen counter. I never owned a rotary phone. The receiver lifts itself, cord snaking across the floor toward the front door. Through the peephole, I can see the booth, parked at the curb now, light on, door open. My name is painted on the brass button in fresh, orange rust. I think the next mile is shorter than the last. I was the last graduate student left in the archives basement when the lights went out. The university's special collections room is 3 stories underground, reachable only by a single elevator that requires a keyed override after 8 p.m. I had signed the log, Evelyn Park, 9:20 seconds, 7:45 p.m., promising security I'd be out by midnight. My thesis was on defunct Midwestern newspapers, and the only surviving run of the Lakeshore Ledger 1921 to 1974 lived in acid-free boxes on a rolling stack that always smelled faintly of lake water and mildew, no matter how dry the climate controls claimed to be. At 11:17, the fluorescence stuttered, then died, leaving only the red exit sign and the glow of my laptop. I swore, tapped the flashlight app, and walked the narrow aisle toward the elevator. The steel gate was shut, down arrow dark. I pressed the call button. Nothing. I tried the wired phone bolted to the wall. Dead line. Above me, the sprinkler pipes began to drip, slow and rhythmic, like someone counting seconds. I told myself the outage would trip the backup generator any minute. I went back to my Carol to pack up. That's when I noticed the stack had moved. Shelf B7, where the 1963 Ledger issue should have been, was rolled flush against the wall. I'd left it open 6 inches to mark my place. Now it was closed, and wedged between the shelves was a newspaper I didn't remember pulling. Lakeshore Ledger, September 23, 1974, final edition. I'd read every surviving issue. There wasn't supposed to be a last day paper. The headline read, "Storm collapses library wing. 1 missing." Under the fold was a grainy photo, me hunched over the same microfilm reader, flashlight app lit on my phone. The dateline was tomorrow. I dropped the paper. The exit sign flickered, then steadied, but the red light now pointed away from the elevator, down a corridor that hadn't existed when I arrived. The air smelled stronger of lake water, cold and weedy. My flashlight app dimmed to a pinprick. I followed the sign anyway. What else could I do? Feeling the carpet squish underfoot as if the concrete beneath had turned to mud. The corridor ended at a wooden door painted institutional green, the kind with a frosted glass pane and a name stenciled in flaking gold. Periodicals, restricted. I'd been through every map of the basement. There was no restricted room. The doorknob was wet. Inside was a single long table under a bare bulb. On the table lay 4 items, a reel of microfilm labeled E. Park, last search, a Polaroid camera, a stack of fresh newspapers dated 1 day ahead, and a reel-to-reel tape recorder with the take-up spool already turning. The recorder clicked on by itself. A woman's voice, mine, began to speak. Day 3 without power. The water is rising. If anyone finds this, the archives aren't what we thought. They preserve more than paper. Behind me, the door side shut. The bulb brightened, and I saw the walls were lined with filing cabinets labeled by year, except the years were future dates, starting with tomorrow and stretching decades ahead. I opened 2025. Inside was a single photograph. Me, standing in this same room, face streaked with algae, newspaper in hand headline. Body recovered, identified as missing archivist. I slammed the drawer. The Polaroid camera flashed without warning. A square of film slid out, developing slowly. Me, standing exactly where I was, but the table behind me was empty and the water was up to my waist. I turned, dry floor, same dust motes spiraling under the bulb. The tape recorder clicked again. The woman's voice, my voice, said, "Check the last box." On the far side of the table sat a Hollinger box I hadn't noticed. The label read, Evelyn Park, returned to stacks. Inside were newspaper clippings, each one a different headline about my death. Graduate student drowns in library flood, body found weeks later. Basement sealed after toxic mold discovery. Ghost lights reported in former archive wing. Every article was dated one day after the previous. The final clipping was dated today. The headline, search ends, water levels too high for recovery. I backed away. The floor was soft now, carpet giving under my heels like wet cardboard. A thin sheet of water slid across it, carrying scraps of newsprint that dissolved as they touched my shoes. The exit sign above the door flickered, pointed now at the ceiling, then went dark. The tape recorder whirred faster, voice layering over itself, my own panic breathing, my name called from somewhere deeper, the steady drip of lake water. I ran. The corridor had narrowed, walls sweating. Behind me cabinets slammed open and shut like mouths. I reached the elevator gate, still locked, pounded until my knuckles split. The water rose to my ankles, then calves, ice cold and smelling of algae. My phone screen showed 11:59 p.m. 1 minute to midnight. The elevator dinged. The doors parted on a car half full of water, mirror walls reflecting me multiplied into infinity. Inside stood a figure in a sodden security uniform, badge M. Alvarez, the guard who'd signed me in that night. His eyes were gone, sockets packed with wet newsprint. He extended a keycard. Overhead, the car speaker crackled. Going up, I stepped back. The doors slid shut. Through the narrowing gap, I watched him press the B4 button, basement 4, a level that did not exist. The elevator descended instead of rising, cables thrumming like a dying heart. Water poured through the ceiling seams. I waded back toward the green door, but the corridor had collapsed into a single flooded room. The tape recorder floated past, still turning. The woman's voice, my voice, whispered right beside my ear, though the recorder was 5 feet away. Close the loop, Evelyn. File yourself. I grabbed the floating Polaroid camera. My reflection in the lens was already bloated, hair fanned like seaweed. I pointed it at myself and pressed the shutter. Flash. The bulb burst. Everything went black. I woke to the clang of the elevator gate. The lights were on, fluorescent, steady. I was lying on the carpet outside the stacks, dry except for my shoes. My laptop showed 12:01 a.m. The rolling shelf B7 stood open 6 inches, exactly as I'd left it. On the table sat a single Hollinger box labeled Evelyn Park, returned to stacks. Inside was a damp Polaroid. Me, ankle deep in water, face lit by a dying bulb, holding yesterday's newspaper. I signed out in the logbook, Evelyn Park, 9/23, 12:02 a.m., and took the elevator up. The security guard, Alvarez, nodded from his desk, eyes perfectly intact. He asked if I'd found everything I needed. I said yes. He said, good. We were running out of room. The storm had passed. The parking lot was dry. But when I opened my car door, lake water poured out, along with scraps of newsprint dated tomorrow. I haven't gone back to the archives. I haven't missed a deadline either. Every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, a new reel of microfilm arrives in my mailbox, labeled blank except for the next day's date. I don't open them. I just drive to campus and slide them into the return slot outside the basement door, the one that isn't on any map. Sometimes, when I walk away, I hear the faint click of a camera behind me, capturing a future I haven't lived yet. I grew up in a 2-story frame house on the edge of a mill town that never quite recovered after the looms went quiet. My bedroom faced the street, and every winter the same storm window rattled in its frame like it wanted to be let inside. When the factory closed for good, the company left behind a warehouse full of display mannequins, hundreds of them, chalk white, eyes painted open, arms frozen in poses that looked like surrender. Kids said they walked at night. Kids say a lot of things. I didn't believe it until the year I turned 16 and the mill burned down for the third time. The fire happened in late October, the night before Halloween. I remember the sky was orange for hours, embers drifting like cheap fireflies. The next morning, the air smelled of wet ash and melted plastic. That afternoon, my father nailed sheets of plywood over the broken windows of our storm porch. He worked fast, muttering about insurance and looters, but I caught him glancing across the street at the warehouse ruin, its brick face now black and weeping soot. By dusk, the plywood was up and the house felt smaller, darker, as if the boards had sealed more than glass. Rain started just after supper, hard, slanted, the kind that turns snow to slush and makes streetlights look diseased. I was upstairs doing homework when the first knock came. Not a polite tap, 3 deliberate pounds that shook the storm window in its track. I froze, pen hovering over algebra. Another knock, slower, like someone counting heartbeats. I crept to the glass and lifted the blind. The mannequin stood on the porch roof directly outside my window. 6 feet tall, male, left arm raised as if about to knock again. Its surface was smeared with ash, giving the white plastic the color of old bone. Rain streamed off its molded hair and pooled in the hollow of its collarbone. I told myself it was a prank. Someone had dragged it from the warehouse and propped it there to scare me. I even laughed, the way you do when the laugh is the only thing keeping your knees from folding. I went downstairs for my father. He was in the living room, asleep in his chair, television casting blue shadows. I shook his shoulder. He woke with a start, eyes wide, staring not at me but past me, toward the front door. "What's that smell?" he whispered. It was the same wet ash stink from the mill fire, only stronger, like it had followed him home. I told him about the mannequin. He followed me upstairs, baseball bat in hand, but when we reached my room, the porch roof was empty. Only wet footprints remained, perfect bare outlines, no tread, the plastic heel and ball of a mannequin foot pressed deep into the tar paper. My father nailed the storm window shut from the inside, muttering that kids had too much free time. I didn't argue. We went back to our separate corners of the house. I left my desk light on and tried to focus on quadratic equations, but every few minutes the bulb flickered, as if someone outside was walking past the power line and momentarily blocking the light. At 12:47 a.m., the knocking started again. Same window, same rhythm. This time it didn't stop. I pulled the blind. The mannequin was back, but closer, palm flat against the glass. Its fingers had no seams, no knuckles, smooth plastic pressed so hard the paint bowed inward. Behind it, more shapes moved on the lawn. Silhouettes in the rain, staggered like chess pieces. I counted 8, then 12, then lost track. They weren't walking. They glided, feet never quite touching the grass. I ran to my parents' room. My mother was awake, sitting upright, sheet clutched to her chest. She said she'd been dreaming of the mill fire, of hands beating on glass she couldn't break. Downstairs, the front door rattled in its frame. 3 measured knocks, then silence, then 3 more. My father loaded the shotgun he kept in the closet and told us to stay upstairs. He went down. I heard the chain slide, the deadbolt turn, the door open. Then nothing, no voices, no footsteps, only the rain. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. I crept to the landing. The front door stood wide. Rain pooled on the hardwood, black water reflecting the porch light. My father was gone. His slippers lay side by side just outside the threshold, as if he'd stepped out of them like a pair of socks. I called 911. The operator said officers were 20 minutes out due to flooding. I stayed on the line, whispering, while my mother locked herself in the bathroom with the phone extension. From my bedroom window, I watched the lawn. The mannequins had arranged themselves in a circle around the porch. They faced inward, arms at their sides, heads tilted slightly, listening. In the center stood the one from my window, arms now lowered, palms open to the sky. Rainwater collected in the hollows of its hands like tiny mirrors. The police found no footprints except my father's leading off the porch and stopping at the sidewalk, as if he'd simply vanished between steps. They checked the warehouse ruins. Nothing but scorched mannequins fused together in grotesque heaps. They reassured us, promised patrols, and left at dawn. My mother wouldn't sleep in the house again. She moved in with my aunt across town. I stayed because staying felt like owing him that much. The next night, the rain returned, harder. I barricaded the front door with furniture, slept on the couch with a shotgun across my lap. At 12:47, the knocking began. Front door, back door, storm windows, even the walls, a syncopated heartbeat that shook dust from the rafters. I didn't open anything. I sat in the dark listening to plastic knuckles on wood, on glass, on aluminum siding, moving clockwise around the house like a slow parade. At 3:11 a.m., the knocking stopped mid-beat. Silence was worse. I crept to the window. The lawn was empty. The mannequins had gone, but the grass was flattened in perfect circles where they'd stood. In each circle lay a single object: my father's watch, his wedding ring, his reading glasses, the brass key to the mill's side door we hadn't seen since the fire. And in the center, the yellow raincoat he wore the night he never came home, folded, dry, and warm to the touch. I never found him. The house sold the following spring for less than the land was worth. The new owners tore it down, put up a duplex with vinyl siding and motion sensor lights. But every October, when the mill ruins smell of wet ash again, the lights flicker at 12:47. People say it's faulty wiring. Kids say the mannequins walk. I still drive past sometimes, late, headlights off, engine idling. If the rain is hard enough, I can see them, white shapes standing in the empty lot, arms raised, waiting for someone to open the door. I drove long haul for a regional outfit that paid by the mile and didn't ask questions about why you only ran nights. The CB in my Kenworth, handle, nightjar, was usually quiet once I cleared the suburbs. Nothing but the occasional bored county mountie asking for a 10 to 100 or another trucker bitching about fuel prices. But one Thursday in November, somewhere between mile marker 412 and nowhere, the radio started talking back. It began at 1:13 a.m. I remember the digital clock because it blinked the same time twice, like a skipped heartbeat. The squelch cracked, then a voice, soft, almost shy, said, "Breaker 19, anybody got their ears on?" I answered, half out of courtesy, half because the road was a straight black ribbon and I needed the company. "You got Nightjar, eastbound on 52. What's your 20? "Silence!" Then, closer, "I'm right behind you." I checked the mirrors. Nothing but my own trailer lights, strobing red across wet asphalt. Rain flicked sideways across the windshield. The wipers couldn't keep up. I told myself it was Skip, some kid with a base station bouncing signals off the clouds. I rolled the volume down and reached for my thermos. The voice came back, still polite, still quiet. "You dropped something." I looked at the passenger seat. My logbook lay open where I'd left it, pen clipped to the page. No, not the logbook. Beside it was a Polaroid photograph I'd never seen. The inside of my cab, taken from the sleeper bunk, me hunched over the wheel, eyes lit demon red by the dash lights. Time stamp at the bottom, 1:13:11 by 19. Tonight. I grabbed the picture, tore it in half. The halves reformed in my hand like wet paper, edges knitting together without a seam. The voice returned, no longer shy. "You're going to miss your turn." Up ahead, the exit for County Road 9 appeared, an asphalt tongue disappearing into corn stubble. I had no deliveries out there, no reason to leave the interstate, but the wheel tugged left like someone else's hand was on it. I fought it, tires skidding, shoulder grinding against the rumble strip. The voice laughed, not cruel, almost sympathetic. Then the CB went to pure static, white noise so loud it vibrated the fillings in my teeth. I reached to switch channels. Every knob was frozen. The static pulsed in patterns. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse. I killed the radio at the fuse panel. The static kept going, now coming from the sleeper curtain behind me. I yanked the curtain back, nothing but darkness and the smell of stale coffee. But the static had weight. It pressed against my eardrums like altitude change. The exit sign loomed again. County Road 9, 1 mile, though I'd already passed it. I checked the odometer. The digits spun backward. The speedometer climbed, 65, 75, 80, while the engine RPM stayed flat. In the convex mirror, I caught a shape sliding along the top of my trailer. Something tall, jointed wrong, moving on all fours against 40-mile-an-hour wind. I did what you're not supposed to do. I pulled the brake, let the rig jackknife across both lanes. The trailer hissed, tires smoking. Then everything stopped except the rain. Static still poured from the sleeper, now layered with a second voice, my own voice, tinny and far away, reciting the last voicemail I ever left my ex-wife. I swear this is the last run, then I'm done driving nights. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. The passenger door opened, though I'd locked it. A figure climbed in, unfolded like a paper cutout gaining dimension. It wore my face, but the cheeks were hollow, eyes flat discs reflecting nothing. It sat, buckled the seatbelt, and turned the CB back on. The static resolved into a radio play, dispatcher's voice, familiar, calling, "Nightjar, you copy?" The me thing keyed the mic with a finger that bent too many times. "Copy that, dispatch." Nightjar's headed home. The rig started rolling again, brakes still set, tires skidding sideways like sled runners. I grabbed the wheel. The me thing didn't fight. It simply placed its hand over mine, skin cold as October mud, and guided us onto the County Road 9 ramp. I looked out the windshield. The ramp wasn't asphalt anymore. It was gravel, then dirt, then nothing, just cornfields lit by headlights that weren't mine. The corn was higher than the cab, tassels whipping the windshield like hair. The CB crackled once more. Last stop, Nightjar. End of the line. The me thing opened the driver's side door and stepped out into the corn. I hit the brakes. This time they worked. Engine died. Silence, real silence, broken only by rain on the roof. I climbed down with a flashlight. The trailer was gone. So was the road. Only the cab sat in a clearing of trampled stalks, headlights pointing at a rotary phone booth identical to the one from the interstate, except this one was made of corn husks and baling wire. The receiver dangled, swaying. I picked it up. Dial tone. Then my dispatcher's voice, calm as ever. "You're 30 minutes late, Nightjar. Where you been?" I looked at my watch. 1:13 a.m. Behind me, corn rustled. The stalks parted. 3 figures stepped into the headlight glare, me at different ages. College me with long hair, exhausted new driver me, and the me thing from the cab, face slack, eyes empty. They spoke in unison, voice layered like a choir. "We kept the line open for you." I dropped the receiver and ran. Corn whipped my face, stalks snapping like bones. Every direction led back to the cab. Eventually, I gave up, climbed into the sleeper, and waited for morning. When the sun rose, I was parked on the shoulder of I-52, exit 412, hazard lights blinking. No cornfields, no phone booth, just a CB hissing soft static. I reached to turn it off. A single Polaroid lay on the dash. Me asleep in the sleeper, 3 shadows standing over me, one holding a rotary phone like an offering. Timestamp, 1:13:11 by 19, tonight. I still drive nights, but I leave the CB off. Every so often at 1:13 a.m. The radio turns itself on, volume so low it's almost breathing. I don't answer. I just grip the wheel and watch the mile markers count down to 412 again, knowing eventually the corn will be taller, the exit ramp will stay dirt, and the line will finally close. I moved to the edge of the subdivision because the rent was cheap and the hoe didn't care if you parked on the lawn. The development is one of those half-finished places, cul-de-sacs that end in dirt mounds, streetlights that flicker like dying fireflies, and a single playground that no kid ever uses because the slide faces the woods. Most nights it's quiet except for the hum of transformers and the occasional dog losing its mind at nothing. Then summer came, and with it the ice cream truck. I first heard it in June, a tinny lullaby drifting through the screens at 3:17 a.m., the same minute my bedside clock always froze whenever the power dipped. I sat up, groggy, expecting to see some teenager joyriding the neighborhood loop. But there it was, a white panel van with a faded pink swirl painted on the side, headlights off, rolling slowly under the street lamps. No driver visible behind the windshield, just the silhouette of a cardboard cone on the dash. The music was wrong, too slow, like a cassette left in the sun too long. I watched until it turned the corner and the song stretched into silence. The next morning, I asked the neighbors. Mrs. Alvarez in 12B said the truck had been coming every few nights for a month. She thought it was a promotion for the new convenience store. Mr. Kim at the end of the row said he called the sheriff, but the deputy laughed and said no vendor license had been issued for our zip code. Nobody admitted to buying anything. The truck returned the following Thursday, again at 3:17. I'd set an alarm to catch it. I stepped onto the porch in boxers and flip-flops, phone flashlight in hand. The van idled 2 houses down, music playing the same warped lullaby. I could see the menu board propped in the serving window, white plastic letters spelling flavors that weren't flavors, ash, static, milk teeth, mother's voice. The prices were dates, all in July 1993. I walked closer. The driver's seat was empty, but the passenger seat held a child's car seat, straps buckled around nothing. A bell dinged when I approached, soft and polite. The serving window slid open on its own. Inside was dark, except for a freezer lit icy blue. A pale hand appeared, too long, jointed wrong, offering a single popsicle the color of skim milk. The wrapper read, "Free." I backed away. The window closed. The truck rolled on, music slowing until it sounded like breathing. I called the sheriff again. This time they sent Deputy Morales, a woman new enough to still knock on doors instead of texting. She took my statement, then drove the subdivision loop at 3:15 a.m. For the next week, she never saw the truck. But on the 8th night, she radioed dispatch, got visual on a white panel van, no plates, music audible. The transmission cut to static. At dawn, they found her cruiser idling in the playground, doors open, driver's seat soaked with melted ice cream that smelled faintly of formaldehyde. The dash cam showed only darkness and Morale speaking to someone outside the frame. Her last words on tape, "What flavor is that?" The hoe held a meeting. Somebody suggested a neighborhood watch. Somebody else blamed coyotes. I stopped sleeping. I kept vigil at the window, coffee gone cold in my hand. The truck appeared every 3rd night, always 3:17, always 1 house closer. By mid-July, it parked directly in front of mine. The music no longer sounded warped. It sounded patient. I watched from behind the blinds as the serving window opened and the long hand set a single popsicle on my mailbox. By morning, the popsicle was gone, wrapper folded neatly into a paper crane. I asked Mrs. Alvarez if she'd ever seen the freezer inside. She went pale. She said her daughter had disappeared in 1993, last seen chasing an ice cream truck on a July night exactly like this one. She showed me a school photo, gap-toothed smile, same pale skin, same July birthday. The missing poster age progression looked almost exactly like the empty car seat. The truck came again last night. 3:17. I stepped outside barefoot, asphalt still warm from the day. The music stopped the moment I crossed the sidewalk. The driver's door creaked open. No one got out. Inside, the steering wheel turned by itself, slow and inviting. The passenger car seat was no longer empty. A girl sat there, eyes closed, skin the color of freezer burn, clutching a popsicle stick. Her name tag, plastic, ice fogged, read, Alvarez. She opened her eyes and spoke in Mrs. Alvarez's voice. "You're tall enough to reach the pedals now." I ran. The truck followed at walking speed, music resuming, louder, until every porch light on the block popped like bulbs in a microwave. I locked the door, pressed my back to it, heart hammering. The lullaby faded but didn't stop. It simply moved inside my head, looping behind my eyes. I tasted ice and copper. At 4:44 a.m., everything went quiet. I found the popsicle wrapper on my pillow, folded into a crane. Written inside, in blue ballpoint ink soft with condensation, "Tomorrow, same time. Bring quarters. I'm leaving at dawn." Lease be damned. But the clock beside my bed still flashes 3:17 whenever the power flickers. And somewhere outside I can hear the truck idling, engine cooling in the humid dark. The lullaby is no longer coming from the street. It's coming from the freezer in my kitchen, humming soft and patient, waiting for me to open the door.